May it please the court?
Yes.
Counsel? We are all gathered here today because of a murderous plot that unfolded on January 15th, 2020. A wicked, premeditated murder, a vile scheme that was birthed by a specific group of co-defendants. Individuals who collectively, consciously, and callously worked together to ensure January 15th, 2020 was the day 23-year-old Charles McCormick died. The murder of Charles McCormick was personal. It was thought out, and it was brazenly executed in broad daylight without any fear of accountability. Why? Why did this group of co-defendants think they could exert such violence with impunity? The answer to that question comes down specifically to who was involved. Because this was not just any group of co-defendants. This was not a group of strangers. This was a group of individuals who knew one another, were close to one another, that were family. Every single one of them that participated in this crime were members of ATK, a local rap group. All but one of them were related by blood. This was a crime committed by family. The names of the guilty: Hakeem Robinson, who's sitting right here, whose nickname is Keemy to his family, Queso, his rap name. Leroy Whitaker, a co-defendant sitting before him, a cousin, whose nickname is Scotty. Dominique Barner, whose nickname is Butta, their friend, their co-defendant, the only one not related to the others by blood. But he might as well have been, because for years they have known Barner. For years they have accepted him. For years he is one of them. Abdul Robinson Jr., nicknamed Kareem K. Crazy, Hakeem Robinson's biological brother. Hakeem Robinson's mother and Leroy Whitaker's father are siblings. Abdul Robinson Jr., Hakeem's biological brother, Leroy Whitaker's cousin, and Torrigon Williams, another cousin, also played a role in this crime. After the murder of Charles McCormick was completed by Dominique Barner, Hakeem Robinson, and Leroy Whitaker, and they had to flee what they three had just accomplished, their premeditated murder of Charles McCormick, Abdul Robinson Sr., nicknamed Blue, also got involved. That is Hakeem Robinson's father, and he had to come to the rescue of Hakeem Robinson's cousin, Leroy Whitaker, and their friend and their co-defendant, Dominique Barner. Because Dominique Barner and Leroy Whitaker, after fleeing with Hakeem Robinson from the murder, trying to escape the police, crashing their car, Dominique Barner and Leroy Whitaker went one way, Hakeem Robinson went another. And Dominique Barner and Leroy Whitaker found themselves trapped in a house that Dominique Barner and Leroy Whitaker broke into to escape the police that were looking for all three of them, trying to avoid getting caught, avoiding accountability for the murder they just committed in broad daylight. And because Dominique Barner and Leroy Whitaker were trapped, Abdul Robinson Sr. had to come pick them up. He picked them up and drove Dominique Barner and Leroy Whitaker away from that home, away from the police, and it was during that ride that he found out exactly what happened. But he continued to help them and drove them away, and for his actions, he's been charged with accessory after the fact. Throughout history, one common truth has been shared by every person who has drawn breath in this world. There is a day you are born and a day you die. And between those two moments, the life that unfolds, uniquely shaped by one's choices and one's actions. Some of those choices are more profound than others, some actions more impactful. But when a group of individuals, even a family, when they come together and intentionally commit a violent crime, a murder, shattering the laws we all share, there must be accountability. And it is precisely for that very reason that in this courtroom, today, 5 years later, Hakeem Robinson and Leroy Whitaker are sitting before you. And at this moment in the trial, with them, though unseen, are two simple but essential questions. Questions that the state will answer for you with the evidence. And those two questions, which you can write down, where were they? And what did they do on January 15th, 2020? Simple questions. Where were they and what did they do? But those simple questions for Hakeem Robinson and Leroy Whitaker have terrifying answers. Answers that they are desperate to keep hidden from each and every one of you. The truth can be a funny thing. Sometimes, the more out of desperation you try to suppress it, the more the guilty fight and rail against each and every aspect of it, the more obvious it becomes. For example, and I want you to hear these despicable words, let them sink in, because these are the words of Hakeem Robinson. Kill a nigga, then go get my toes done. Kill a nigga, then go get my toes done. Those are his words that he attached to a video he took of himself as he sat in a chair in a nail salon getting a pedicure. Just a couple days after running Charles McCormick down on foot and executing him. You're going to see that video. You're going to read his words. You're going to see his tired feet. And when you look at that video, when you see him, when you see his words telling you what he did, believe it. And let that image, his answer to both of you, all of you, about what he did, sear your collective memories. On January 15th of 2020, these two co-defendants, they shared a motive, they shared a goal, and for their deeds, they will forever share guilt. What was their undoing? What has brought them here before all of you today? Simply, the combination of arrogance, mistakes, and bad luck. For justice's sake, thankfully, the murder of Charles McCormick was captured on video. co-defendants in particular left a trail of overwhelming and inescapable evidence in their violent, chaotic wake. Evidence that is much like an avalanche, quickly gaining momentum until that evidence ultimately and unavoidably catches up and buries all doubt in this case. So what kind of evidence are you going to hear? Are you going to see? Evidence in virtually every form imaginable. You're going to see evidence, you're going to hear evidence directly related to the motive in this case, because it was a personal motive, and we'll talk about that in a moment. You're going to see the video of the murder, and that video is a powerful piece of evidence, because not only does it capture the murder, it also captures the vehicle that was used by Dominic Barner, Hakeem Robinson, and Leroy Whitaker when they committed this crime, a stolen Nissan Altima. And you will see that vehicle on video, and there will be no doubt that that vehicle was occupied by the people who committed this crime. And that vehicle was collected, well, evidence inside it was collected immediately after this crime, immediately after they fled from committing the murder, from the police. When that car crashed, and inside it, amongst the items that were collected, DNA evidence. DNA evidence for Leroy Whitaker and Hakeem Robinson, fingerprint evidence for Hakeem Robinson, DNA fingerprints forever tethering them to that car, to their crimes. You will also see on that video of the murder exactly what the shooter was wearing. And I want you to pay particular attention to it, because this is a video, not a still photograph. You'll get to see the whole thing. And you will see that the shooter was wearing a two-tone hoodie, gray chest, dark black arms, black hoodie pulled up over his head. And I want you to take note of that, because you will see that same hoodie in photographs and videos wrapped around Hakeem Robinson's guilty body. You will see the distinct firearm that he carried when he committed that murder, when he pulled the trigger. And you will see that same firearm in another video in Hakeem Robinson's hands. Not for entertainment. He used it for murder on January 15, 2020. You also will be presented with call records showing communication amongst these co-defendants and cell site location information, placing Leroy Whitaker, placing Hakeem Robinson where they should not have been, placing them where the guilty were. You will see social media posts, in addition to the nail salon video that we've already talked about, another video posted to Hakeem Robinson's Instagram account just a couple days after the murder, a video of Charles McCormick rapping a song. But when you get to Charles McCormick in the video and you see his face, what's added? Hand emojis with the text, bye-bye. And then that's followed up by the nail salon video that we've discussed, where he needed to get his toes done. What I want you to remember, because there is going to be so much evidence in this case against both defendants, so many different types of evidence, that it's much like a puzzle. While they're powerful on their own, independently, when you put them together, and they come together so easily, so intuitively, when you put these pieces together, you will be presented with the truth of January 15, 2020. And that will be a picture showing each and every one of you who committed this crime. And what will be staring back at you will be the crystal clear pictures of Hakeem Robinson and Leroy Whitaker, just as clear as if you were to turn your gaze over there at this very moment. One of the key pieces of evidence that exists, as I have said, is the video recording of this murder. That video recording exists because Victor Krueger, a citizen, has nothing to do with this, just happened to have a dash cam in his truck, and just happened to be parked at the right place at the right time. That video is completely independent, wholly unbiased, and incapable of lying. It just captured what happened in high definition for each and every one of you to see. And so, when you watch that video, I want you to trust your eyes. Because again, it's not a single photo, it is a video that shows in detail as Hakeem Robinson, who was the shooter in this case, tracked Charles McCormick down on foot and executed him. Now, that video, essentially it's going to be a time machine, transporting each and every one of you individually and collectively back 5 years. That's how long ago this was. 5 years. Placing you in the position Victor Krueger found himself when he witnessed Charles McCormick's final terror-filled seconds on this earth. But you will get to watch that video from the safety of this courtroom. And I want to be very clear. This is a crime that happened 5 years ago, so when you watch that video, you're going to see the shooter looked like 5 years ago. Not today. Today doesn't matter. It was 5 years ago. Scam. This video is going to be very, very powerful, and I want you to pay attention to it, but I do want to be clear about one thing. Based on the location of the camera, it does not capture the shooter's face. It just didn't. But it's okay, it didn't have to. It captured more than enough detail that video, along with all of the other evidence in this case, will make it crystal clear that that individual was Hakeem Robinson. I don't expect that there will be any debate that what happened to Charles McCormick on that video is anything other than first-degree murder. I don't believe that will be a debate. The only question in this case for you to decide who's responsible. That is it. Bringing us back to those two very simple questions. Where were they and what did they do? What was the motive? Why did this crime take place? To fully understand that, why the crime took place, and the significance of the day, you have to know what happened exactly 1 year prior, on January 15th, 2019. On January 15th, 2019, Willie Addison, whose rap name is Boss Goon, was in a vehicle with family when shots rang out. Willie Addison was struck and ultimately died as a result of his injuries. But he wasn't the only one in the vehicle. Also inside the vehicle on January 15, 2019, Abdul Robinson Sr., Hakeem's father, because you see Willie Addison was Abdul Robinson Sr.'s stepson. He raised him as his own son. Willie Addison, Hakeem Robinson's brother. Also in that vehicle, Abdul Robinson Jr., Hakeem's other brother, Leroy Whitaker's cousin, and Abdul Robinson Jr. was struck in the head. He survived, but he suffered lasting effects that would prevent him from running down his target a year later, physical limitations that Hakeem Robinson and Leroy Whitaker did not share. Also in the vehicle, Torgon Williams, their cousin, and a couple of others. And while it is true that neither Hakeem Robinson, Leroy Whitaker, or Dominique Varner were in the car when those shots rang out on January 15, 2019, it doesn't matter, because it was still their family in that car. It was their family whose blood was spilled. Physical injuries sometimes can heal. Physical pain can diminish. But memories, a vendetta, well, that lasts someone's lifetime. Now, I want to be very, very clear. Charles McCormick was not involved in the shooting of Willie Addison or anyone else in that vehicle. He wasn't involved. Charles McCormick's sin, what made him a target, was that he was affiliated with people who are part of another local rap group, Six Block. And Six Block and ATK are rivals. They don't like each other. They hate each other. And one of the traditions of both groups is producing rap music, drill rap, diss songs that make fun of or talk disrespectfully about members of their ops, the other group, who have been shot and killed. So following that tradition, Charles McCormick in 2019 put out a song, and that song referenced the shooting of Willie Addison. And as you can imagine, that is not something that either Hakeem Robinson, Leroy Whitaker, or their family were happy about. So Charles McCormick became a target, an easy target. He's the ops. And this was about sending a message. Because not only was it personal, but it's about respect. And we aren't going to let our ops sing songs like that, not about our family. That is why Charles McCormick was targeted. So on January 15, 2020, 1 year anniversary of Willie Addison's death, Charles McCormick walked out of his apartment on Atlantic Boulevard, made his way to his car, and then drove to Express Employment, a temp agency located on the Merrill Road Shopping Plaza. And he went there because he had just been selected for a new job. Charles McCormick needed to get the details to start that new job. But when he drove there, he had no idea that in a Nissan Altima, he was being stalked by Hakeem Robinson, Leroy Whitaker, and their good friend Dominique Varner, who was driving both of them, pursuing Charles McCormick from his apartment complex all the way up to the Merrill Road Shopping Plaza. And they pulled in, and they saw that Charles McCormick parked his car and had walked into Express Employment. So what did they do? They waited. Hakeem Robinson with his X-Star model rifle, Leroy Whitaker with his AR-15 rifle, both loaded, rounds chambered, ready to fire, because the plan at that point was when Charles McCormick walks out, Hakeem Robinson, Leroy Whitaker will jump out of that stolen Nissan Altima with their rifles and gun him down. And Dominique Barner, their friend, will pick them up and drive them out of there. But they had to wait. And they had to wait. And as they waited, Dominique Barner decided it was better to reposition their vehicle. And so he was actually able to drive over to where Charles McCormick parked and pulled into a parking space behind Charles McCormick's car and just over to the left. And that is where they waited. And then, just around 11 a.m. that morning, a Wednesday morning, Charles McCormick finished inside. He got a red folder with the paperwork and the details so he could start his new job. And with that red folder in his hand, he said his goodbyes. Miss Saunders, who owned that agency at the time, was a friend of his grandmother. Said goodbye to her and opened the door and began to walk outside. When Charles McCormick did that, all he had in his hand was that red folder. And that red folder represented the promise of employment and the hope of a future filled with false hope. He began to take his fateful steps towards the parking lot, not knowing who and what was waiting for him. So, for a few seconds, the bright light of the morning sun warmed his skin, saturated his eyes, and fresh air filled his optimistic lungs. For a few seconds, Charles had no idea he would never get to start that new job. There would be no more birthdays to celebrate. He wouldn't see or talk to his mother again. He had no idea there were seconds left to believe in a tomorrow. Seconds left in his young life. And then, in an instant, that all changed. Because Hakeem Robinson got excited and jumped out of that Nissan Altima early. He didn't wait for Charles McCormick to make it back to his car, where he was going to then hop out and shoot him so he could easily drive away. Couldn't wait, he got too excited. So he hopped out early and chased Charles McCormick down on foot. And when he got out of that car, you will see in the video, again, two-tone hoodie, gray chest, dark black arms, dark hood pulled up over his head, not out of shame, but in an attempt to conceal as much of his recognizable face as possible. In his hands, an X-Star model AR rifle pistol, because it's got a very short stock, so it's easier to control. And I want you, again, to remember that, because you're going to see that same rifle again in a video in his hands. And that rifle was chambered in .223 caliber, and with that rifle in Hakeem Robinson's hands, his eyes locked onto Charles McCormick, their prey, the reason that they were there. His finger caressed the metal trigger to his rifle. But that wasn't just a piece of metal. On that morning, that trigger represented the power of life and death for Hakeem Robinson, for his co-defendants, for the plan that they came up with to murder Charles McCormick. And so intentionally, deliberately, Charles McCormick, as he tried to run away, Hakeem Robinson pulled the trigger. And when he pulled that trigger, a deafening sound thundered through the air as the gunpowder inside the chambered .223 caliber round ignited, propelling his round, their will, out of his barrel at thousands of feet per second. Charles McCormick did not stand a chance. And as he turned to run, first back towards Express Employment, and then around the building on the sidewalk, he barely made it that far before he was struck by one of those rounds and fell to the ground. Hakeem Robinson, his hunter, designated executioner, never stopped pursuing, and he was on him in seconds. This entire murder lasted about 10 seconds or less. He's on top of him with his rifle pointed at Charles McCormick. He's on the ground, injured, unarmed, defenseless, in need of some mercy. But there would be no mercy. Not on January 15, 2020, not on Willie's Day. So, without mercy, and to fulfill the plan, the murder that they collectively came up with and were participating in, Hakeem Robinson pulled the trigger over and over and over and over again. And each and every pull of that trigger resulted in hot metal tearing in to Charles McCormick's body. Hot metal slashing open his flesh. Hot metal ripping through his muscles. Hot metal blowing open his skull. Flesh, brain matter, even teeth were sent flying through the air. Tissue, blood, metal fragments, and ejected shell casings left littering the ground. 23 years of life undone in an instant. That paper folder that just a few seconds ago Charles thought meant he had a future, obsolete, meaningless, discarded, on the ground, soaking in his blood. It took Hakeem Robinson, Leroy Whitaker, co-defendants, less than 10 violent-filled seconds to turn the cold, concrete slab beneath Charles's body into an unpeaceful resting place, forever stained with Charles' blood and forever stained with their guilt for what they did. You are going to see that unfold on that video. But what you will also see is that after that murder was completed, and Hakeem Robinson got back into the passenger side of that Nissan Altima, a stolen car, so it couldn't be connected back to them, driven by Dominique Varner, they took off. They sped away from their guilt, trying to outrun it. But unfortunately for them, we didn't just have a dash cam video from Victor Krueger. Because this was a shopping plaza, at the other end was a Publix. And coming out of the Publix was an officer, Officer Collins. And Officer Collins heard the gunfire. Now, he's a great great distance off at the other end of that shopping plaza, but he hears the gunfire, and he looks over, and he sees that two-tone hoodie individual with the rifle hopping back into that Nissan Altima on the passenger side. Now, from where he was positioned, he didn't see Charles McCormick. He didn't know that he had been shot or that he had been killed, but he heard shots. He knew something bad happened. That the individual with that rifle was getting into that Nissan Altima and taking off. So he got into his patrol car and tried to get behind it. And he followed that Nissan Altima as it pulled out of the shopping plaza onto Merrill Road, heading back towards Townsend. Officer Collins pursued it. Dominique Barner was driving. Leroy Whitaker, Hakeem Robinson still in that Nissan with their guns. And Dominique Barner, trying to get all of them out of there, drove at a high rate of speed, reaching speeds of approximately 100 miles an hour, driving recklessly, turning onto Townsend, going into a residential neighborhood. So Officer Collins is trying to keep up, activates his lights and sirens, but they're not stopping. And he radios other officers for assistance. And as he's trying to maintain a visual on their car that they are in, he notices that the Nissan Altima is going to Townsend, and it blows through an intersection at Townsend and Lone Star. And that's where he loses visual. But just as he's losing visual of that Nissan Altima, another officer is radioing. Hey, I'm down in Townsend, I got it. So another officer has visual of that car and begins pursuing it, ultimately down Alderman, which is right off Townsend. Officer Collins, once he gets to the intersection where he lost him, turns onto Lone Star, essentially traveling parallel to the other officer and that Nissan Altima that he's hearing over the radio. And as he is traveling parallel, he hears over the radio that that Nissan Altima has abruptly stopped and turned around. Speeding back, gets around the other officer, heading back towards Townsend. So Officer Collins does the same thing. He stops. He turns around and starts heading back. And once he gets from Lone Star down to that intersection of Townsend, he looks to the left, and further down Townsend, great distance from where he is at, he sees that same Nissan Altima pop back out, trying to get out of there, trying to escape, and so he is trying to catch up. But it's also a little after 11 a.m. on a Wednesday in a residential neighborhood, so he's having to pay attention to his surroundings. And as he's driving to catch up, still from a great distance back, that Nissan Altima crashes. And when it crashes, based on where Officer Collins is at in his vehicle, still a good distance back, he notices one individual get out and run east towards the house that they crashed in front of, and another, wearing that two-tone hoodie with a rifle, who you will know is Hakeem Robinson, goes west towards another house in the direction of Belmead. So Officer Collins continues to drive, eventually making it up to that area where he stops his car, gets out, draws his weapon, because he's going to go after the person who had the rifle. But he only saw the person with the rifle for a couple seconds as he darted across the street as he's driving from way back. So he cautiously approaches the house where that individual ran. And then there's a fence. And when he gets to the fence, he sees for about a second that individual in the two-tone hoodie clearing the backyard fence. Never sees him again. Doesn't get close to him. You will see that person as they dart across Belmead, because it was captured on a video from a house on a Ring doorbell, wearing that same two-tone hoodie. Officer Collins radios to other officers direction of travel so they can try and find him, but they don't. And he goes back to that Nissan Altima to secure it, make sure any evidence inside it could be collected. And based on where he was at when that Nissan crashed, he completely missed that there was a third person in the car. But we know that there are 3 people in the car based on many different types of evidence that you will see in this trial. But one is video surveillance. Because just as the shooter, Hakeem Robinson, is running across Belmead, west, another house, east, has video surveillance of 2 individuals running through the backyard. And those 2 individuals, you will come to know, based on the evidence, are Leroy Whitaker and Dominique Barner. They, just like Hakeem Robinson, were desperate to escape what they had done. Unlike Hakeem Robinson, they left their firearms behind in that Nissan Altima. And what happens next doesn't have anything to do really with Hakeem Robinson. It has more to do with Dominique Barner and Leroy Whitaker. Only it shows how desperate all 3 of them were to get away from the murder they were all too willing to commit. Dominique Barner and Leroy Whitaker made their way to the backyard of a home located further down Townsend. 1033 Townsend. A home that 57-year-old Barbara Buckley lived in, along with her husband. But that morning, her husband had gone to work, and she was home alone. So she thought. However, what she did not know in that moment was that Leroy Whitaker and Dominique Barner had made their way into her backyard because the police are in the neighborhood looking for them, looking for all 3 of them. So they go into her porch, her patio, and through her rear sliding glass door, Leroy Whitaker and Dominique Barner decide they're going in. They don't have permission. They don't know her, never met her, never been in that home before. But they are desperate to escape the police, to evade them, to evade getting caught for what they had just done. And with that intention, to evade the police, Dominique Barner and Leroy Whitaker go into Barbara Buckley's home without permission, and they try to hide inside. Miss Buckley comes out of a back bathroom, and she notices the front door to one of her bedrooms is shut. And she thinks, that cat, maybe the cats ran in and accidentally shut the door, and now they're trapped. So she goes to her bedroom door, and she opens it to step inside to check on her cats. Her cats aren't inside. Leroy Whitaker and Dominique Barner are. 2 people she does not know, has never met, never seen before, and should not be in her home. And she tells them, get out. Uses some more colorful language, but get out. What are you doing here? And they try and plead and say, well, we're hiding from people. Doesn't say, we just committed a murder and it's the police looking for us. But she's like, I don't care. Get out of my house. She walks to her front door, telling Dominique Barner, telling Leroy Whitaker to get out. She opens that door. She begins to yell for help. But Leroy Whitaker and Dominique Barner aren't going anywhere. They can't go outside. That's where the police are. They just committed a murder along with Hakeem Robinson. So Dominique Barner and then Leroy Whitaker, who assists him, physically grab Barbara Buckley and pull her inside her own home. Shut the door. She is physically thrown to the ground. And while she's on the ground, Dominique Barner and Leroy Whitaker are there. Dominique Barner reaches down with both hands, puts them around her neck, and begins to choke her. At one point, Leroy Whitaker even asks if Dominique Varner wants him to hurt her. She can't fight back enough to get away. She's trapped in her home, and she complies. And so they then make her sit in her own living room. Dominique Varner takes her phone so she can't call for help. And Leroy Whitaker goes back to that front bedroom where he uses his phone to call for help. Doesn't call Hakeem Robinson. Why would he? He can't help him. He's running west. So who does he call? He calls Abdul Robinson Jr., Hakeem's brother. And he asks for help. And you're going to see phone records corroborating that, from Leroy Whitaker to Abdul Robinson Jr., and then also to Abdul Robinson Sr., his father. You're going to see how he sent them pin drops, location information, showing where they were at. Because again, they haven't been in that house before. They don't live there. They're not supposed to be there. And while they wait for help, Leroy Whitaker and Dominique Varner take clothing from Miss Buckley and her husband so that they can change their appearance, steal her clothes. And then after they've been there for about an hour, a red-orange Dodge Challenger driven by Abdul Robinson Sr., blue, his father, shows up. You'll see some video surveillance that captures that car as it comes down Townsend. He shows up, pulls into the driveway, and eventually Leroy Whitaker and Dominique Varner go outside, leaving Miss Buckley behind in her own home for the first time in an hour. And there, they are driven away by Abdul Robinson Sr., who learns what happened and drives them away, helps them evade the police. After they drive Leroy Whitaker and Dominique Varner away, Miss Buckley goes outside and, with the help of a neighbor, lifted to her feet. You see, she calls 911, but then she also sees an officer down the road. Guys, down the road, there crashed Nissan Altima, the murder car. And she tells the officer what happened to her. The officer tells her she's got to go back and wait at her house. He's sending officers, and detectives go and show up. And they meet with her because, again, they're still looking for the suspects. So they meet with Miss Buckley. She's able to give a very good general description, clothing description that matches the video of the backyard showing Leroy Whitaker and Dominique Varner as they run through it. You can see their clothing. Her description matches those two individuals. She also got a very good look at the arms of Dominique Varner because he had some distinct tattoos on his forearms. She provides that description to the police. And so, based on her descriptions that day, Dominique Varner is identified as a potential suspect. They put together a photo spread, and they show that photo spread to Miss Buckley. She identifies Dominique Varner, one of the two that came in my house, battered me, stole my phone, my clothing. The other individual, who is Leroy Whitaker, she never got a good look at his face, so she can't identify him. She didn't have to, because he did that for her. Because when Leroy Whitaker went in along with Dominique Varner and grabbed her and pulled her back inside, he left some of himself behind. Essentially a signed confession. 3 little letters, DNA, on Miss Buckley's clothing. A place it had no right to be. That DNA evidence, along with his cell phone records and location information, proved beyond all doubt it was Leroy Whitaker and Dominique Varner that broke into Miss Buckley's home and held her hostage as they tried to escape the police because of the murder they, along with Hakeem Robinson, just committed. Also, just down the road in that Nissan Altima, the murder car, some more powerful and unrefutable evidence was discovered. Inside that car that was occupied by the suspects in this case, when it crashed, a couple of white shirts. DNA. DNA for Leroy Whitaker, Hakeem Robinson. From the interior swab of the vehicle, a mixture of DNA included Hakeem Robinson. DNA in a car it had no right to be in. A car that's not connected to them in any way. Connected to the people who committed this crime. And also in that vehicle, 2 firearms. Now, neither one of the firearms recovered is the murder weapon, because that was carried away in the hands of Hakeem Robinson when he ran west and wasn't caught. But in that vehicle, a loaded AR-15 in the back, 26 rounds, including 1 round chambered, ready to fire. That was Leroy Whitaker's rifle. He wasn't a spectator in this. He was armed and fully willing and ready to participate, and participate he did, even though he did not pull a trigger. Also, a Glock handgun. And on the slide of that Glock, a fingerprint. Hakeem Robinson's. It's not just the evidence, it's also the location of that evidence in that Nissan Altima that was just occupied by the people who committed this crime. Now, you already know how Leroy Whitaker and Dominique Varner got out of there, but what about Hakeem Robinson? How did he escape? Well, based on his path of travel west through Townsend, that neighborhood, takes him to a nature preserve. And he went through that little park nature preserve and made it out of the other side at an apartment complex on Arlington Expressway. There, he needed a ride. And he was able to relay his location to his brother, Abdul Robinson Jr., who was with their cousin, Torgon Williams, because they both played a role in this crime as well. And at that moment, Abdul Robinson Jr. and Torgon Williams were back at Torgon's house on Dalehurst Drive, just behind the Merrill Road Shopping Plaza, where Torgon lived with his girlfriend of 5 years ago, named Natalie. Now, Natalie was asleep and had no idea what had happened that morning. But Abdul Robinson Jr. did, Torgon did, and they knew he needed help, just as Leroy Whitaker and Dominique Varner needed help. So they woke up Natalie. She was asked to go to that apartment complex and pick him up. She did. She brought him back to their house, where he was reunited with his brother Abdul Robinson Jr. and his cousin Torgon. That will be corroborated by another witness who lived at the apartment complex at the time, who saw a white female in a silver car, matching the description of Natalie and the vehicle she drove over there, driving around the parking lot like she was looking for somebody. And that resident realized Natalie didn't really belong in the area, and she had also gotten an alert on her phone about JSO looking for suspects and a clothing description, including that two-tone hoodie. And as Natalie was out front trying to find him, another person coming through the woods wearing that two-tone hoodie. Now, she didn't get a long enough look to be able to say, I recognize that person. She's not going to be able to identify him. She got a quick glance because when she saw the clothing based on the alert, she got scared and ran back inside. But that was Hakeem Robinson coming out. And Natalie picked him up and drove him back to Oregon for Abdul Robinson Jr. Dominique Barner was the first to be identified, first to be arrested, the first to be charged. And when he was initially arrested on January 15th of 2020, that same day, he wasn't completely forthcoming. He didn't walk in to the police and say, you got me, this is what I did, this is what we did. He minimized, he made some statements, but he minimized and didn't say who he was with. But he was charged, and he's going to testify in this case. So when he testifies, he's going to come out the back, because he's in a jail uniform, he's in shackles, and you will learn that he has been charged with multiple crimes. That he has pled guilty to multiple crimes. He has pled guilty to second-degree murder for his involvement in driving and taking and participating in the murder of Charles McCormick with Hakeem Robinson and Leroy Whitaker. He's pled guilty. He's pled guilty to burglary with an assault or battery for what he and Leroy Whitaker did to Miss Buckley, breaking into her home to escape the police and grabbing her and pulling her back inside and holding her there. He's pled guilty to aggravated fleeing and attempting to elude law enforcement. And he has also pled guilty to a separate second-degree murder charge. When he testifies, he does not know what sentence he is going to get because he has not yet been sentenced. But for each and every one of those charges, he's pled guilty to the court, to the judge. And the judge will decide what sentence Dominique Barner gets. All he knows is what he's looking at. And he's looking at up to life in prison. Life, without parole. You can get that. His guideline sentence, which reflects the minimum he should get, absent a legal reason to go below, is 41.8 years, up to life in prison. Now, his cooperation does provide the court with a legal basis that allows the judge to go below 41.8 years, if the judge wants to. Doesn't have to. Entirely up to the judge. He also knows that best case scenario, there is no way he can get anything less than 20 years. So he's looking at 20 years, 2 decades, up to life in prison. And even with his cooperation, he can get life. But he's going to tell you what he did. And when he testifies, knowing what he has been charged with, what he has done. The state's not asking that you like him. The state's not asking that you think, I'd be friends with that guy. I'd hang out with him. Though that's exactly what Hakeem Robinson and Leroy Whitaker did, and what they have done for years. They were, they're the same. But what he has to say, because he was involved, is enlightening. But also make no mistake, this case, without Dominique Barner, is proven. It's proven by all the evidence they left behind. It's proven by the DNA, it's proven by the fingerprints, it's proven by call records, it's proven by cell site location information, it's proven by the video of the murder, your own God-given common sense, as well as social media posts, among many other pieces of evidence. When Barner testifies, he is going to acknowledge Charles McCormick was targeted because of that song. A song that, by the way, you will see in evidence because it was on Hakeem Robinson's iCloud account. You get to hear it. He's going to confirm that was the motive, that was the reason, that they found out, and Barner played a role in finding out where Charles McCormick lived. And on the morning of January 15, 2020, he calls Abdul Robinson Jr., his brother, Leroy Whitaker's cousin, says he's back. That's going to be confirmed by call records. And then what happens? Dominic Barner gets picked up by Hakeem Robinson, Leroy Whitaker, Abdul Robinson Jr., and they, along with Torgon Williams, eventually all go over to Charles McCormick's apartment complex with the intent, one, killing him. Abdul Robinson Jr. and Torgon are in a clean car, a rental, Dodge Journey. Can't be tied back. It's a rental, excuse me. Hakeem Robinson, Leroy Whitaker, and Dominic Barner are in a stolen car, the car that can't be tied back to them. And the role of the clean car is to basically try and make sure they don't get pulled over by the police when they're going where they need to go. So collectively, they go to Charles McCormick's apartment complex. And again, Hakeem Robinson is armed with his rifle, as is Leroy Whitaker. And there, they wait for him. But as they wait, because it takes so long, they get distracted. They miss Charles McCormick when he comes out of his apartment. And he's able to make it to his car. Then he's able to drive away from his complex towards the shopping plaza on Merrill Road. And so they pivot. Dominic Barner, Hakeem Robinson, Leroy Whitaker pursue him, stalk him, follow him, all with the intent to end his life. And that's when they make it to that shopping center. And ultimately what unfolds, you will witness with your own eyes. What Dominic Barner will add is that when they got to the shopping plaza, not only initially was it, again, Leroy Whitaker and Hakeem Robinson that were going to jump out and kill Charles McCormick, but Barner says, I changed the plan. We were too far back. It's a shopping center, it's getting busy. So he relocates closer to Charles McCormick's car, and the plan then becomes that Hakeem Robinson's going to hop out as soon as Charles makes it back to his car. While they wait for Charles to exit, Hakeem Robinson does two things. One, using Instagram on his phone, he contacts Raekwon Howard. Raekwon Howard, who is affiliated with Six Block. They're ops. Tells him, got one of your boys slipping. Let him know they're getting ready to take somebody out, but doesn't say who. That will be confirmed by Instagram records showing that video call between Hakeem Robinson's Instagram account and Raekwon Howard's right before the murder. Dominic Barner will also tell you that as they waited, Hakeem Robinson thought about not using his rifle. He didn't want to burn that gun. He used it to murder and rid. So he thought about using Barner's glove. Remember whose fingerprints were on that? You may not like Dominic Barner. He is a criminal, and he is going to spend decades up to life in prison for what he has done. But because you may not like him, because he is guilty, that does not absolve Hakeem Robinson or Leroy Whitaker of their guilt either. It does not change what they did. So when Dominic Barner testifies, he's a criminal. He just won't be the only criminal in this courtroom. Another person you will hear from is Abdul Robinson Sr. family. And when he testifies, you will learn that he has been charged with and pled to 2 different counts of accessory after the fact. One for this case and one for another. Unlike Dominic Barner, there has been a partial negotiation with Abdul Robinson Jr. And the maximum sentence he can get is 20 years. Again, it will be decided by the judge. But he's also in his mid-50s. And he has some health issues. And a sentence of 20 years could take him to his life expectancy. And he knows when he comes in that he's going to be despised, that he's going to be hated by his family, by Hakeem Robinson, Leroy Whitaker, maybe others in this courtroom. The question is not, do you like Abdul Robinson Jr., Senior? The question isn't, Do you think he's being a good father? The question is, what he has to say, is it corroborated by the evidence? Independent evidence. Evidence he has no control over, that he could not manufacture. Is it corroborated by the evidence? Not, do we like him? And what he's going to tell you is that Willie Addison was his son. That he was in the car with him, along with his other son, Abdul Jr., when they were shot. Oregon, shot. And that after that shooting, they became aware of Charles McCormick's song, and they didn't like it. Abdul Jr., who was shot in the head but recovered, and his brother Hakeem Robinson, they were very angry over that song. And he will tell you that he was contacted on January 15, 2020 by Abdul Jr. and Leroy Whitaker, Scotty, because they needed help. And though he didn't know about the murder before it happened, didn't participate in it, he went, he picked them up, and he found out all about it. And he still drove them away and helped them get out of there. He also will tell you that he is aware of that dash cam video that captured the murder. And he has seen it. And he will tell you in this courtroom, regardless of what you think of him, the shooter in that video is his son, Hakeem Robinson. He knows his son. You may have thoughts about him as a father, good, bad, or indifferent. He knows who Hakeem Robinson is. And he knows that's him in that shooting. That shooting on that video. In addition to all of this evidence, as I have touched on briefly, you will see cell phone records, communications among the members of this group, these co-defendants, but the cell site location information. Cell site location information confirming what Abdul Robinson Sr., Blue, will tell you, that he was somewhere else when this crime happened, and how he arrived at Townsend Boulevard to pick Leroy Whitaker and Dominic Barner up. See that cell site location information as well as the pin drop sent to him and the calls. You will see cell site location information for Abdul Robinson Jr. He had two phones in his possession that day, a 904 number and a 478 area code number. And both of those place him going to pick Dominic Barner up that morning, going over to the apartment complex where Charles McCormick lived, and then back over near the shopping plaza where Oregon lived. And then finally, after relaying information to his father so that Leroy Whitaker and Dominic Barner could be picked up, back over on Brown Jersey Court, where he lived with Hakeem Robinson and their father. Leroy Whitaker, his phone, places him where he did not want to tell you he was at. Where he wants to keep hidden from you. It places him in the area of Charles McCormick's apartment complex, Merrill Road Shopping Plaza, where the murder took place at the time of the murder, and then over on Townsend, where the burglary to Miss Buckley's home took place, and then finally, after getting picked up by Dominic Barner, back Brown Jersey Court. Excuse me, we got picked up by Blue and was driven back to Brown Jersey Court. And then Hakeem Robinson, he had a couple phones. His primary phone number, a 904 area code, which was very active that day, until it wasn't. That morning, it mysteriously is turned off. It was silent. No calls, no activity, nothing. For a period of hours covering stalking, the murder, the flight, till he would have been back home. And then later that afternoon, it's up again. Curious. But then there was a second phone number, a 478 area code number that the evidence will establish belonged to Hakeem Robinson. that phone number, data files. FaceTime calls, Instagram calls, things like that. Guess where it was? The area of the shopping center, the area of the murder, at the time of the murder. And over in the area of Townsend, where that Nissan fled and crashed, where he ran away on foot. And then back over near Dalehurst in that area, around the time Natalie would have picked him up and been bringing him back. Curious. Because of all of the evidence, the powerful evidence, the inescapable evidence in this case, I expect that one of the focuses will be on a few witnesses who, again, keep in mind when this murder took place, and you'll see it lasted 10 seconds, 10 violent seconds, but seconds nonetheless. Were some witnesses who, based on how far away they were, their vantage point, how long of a look they got, a number of factors come into play, and you'll have your common sense to evaluate that. Some witnesses who, when they estimated, provided a guess of what they thought the shooter's height might be as he was running and gunning, underestimated the height that we know Hakeem Robinson to be. You'll be able to evaluate that because you'll also have the video. And the video will show what Hakeem Robinson, the shooter, 5 years ago in relation to the victim, Charles McCormick. You'll be able to make your own observations and determinations as to how they physically compare to one another. I also expect that there will be some attacks of Dominique Barner and Abdul Robinson Sr. because their testimony is damning. But when they testify and when those attacks come, I just want you to do two things. One, simply ask yourself, removing emotion as to whether or not you like them or think they're good people. They are criminals. They're just not the only ones. Does the evidence, the independent evidence in this case, corroborate what they have to say? Does it establish what they are telling you? And then secondly, remember, they're not strangers. This is a family. And consider, when co-defendants come together to commit a violent murder, angels aren't invited. Hakeem Robinson and Leroy Whitaker may have temporarily physically escaped their guilt on January 15, 2020, but that guilt stains them to this day. If Charles McCormick still had the ability to speak, if before he died, hidden truths were revealed.
Excuse me, we need all electronic devices to be turned off. Thank you.
And if Charles McCormick would have witnessed and been aware of and seen and heard all of the evidence that we have discussed, DNA, the fingerprints found in the murder car, the motive found on his account, the video of the murder itself, cell phone records, location information, the nail salon post, and many others. Is there any doubt that if he could stand in here and testify, he would not scream Hakeem Robinson and Leroy Whitaker's guilty name? The evidence will answer for you where they were and what they did on January 15, 2020.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask that you each step into your respective jury rooms for a